I want to be straight with you about something that's been developing inside the Cleveland Browns facility, because I think it matters a lot more than the way it's being framed in most places. This isn't just locker room gossip. This isn't the kind of manufactured drama that gets stirred up every training camp and disappears by week 2. What's happening in Cleveland right now involves Myles Garrett, the best defensive player in football, the unquestioned heartbeat of that franchise. And it involves him drawing a very hard, very public line in the sand over how Shedeur Sanders is being treated inside that building. And once you understand the full context of what went down, and why Garrett felt compelled to step into it the way he did, I think you'll understand just how significant this moment actually is for the Browns as an organization. Here's what I know. When Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland, not everyone inside that locker room was happy about it. And I don't mean in the normal competitive way that veterans sometimes eye a highly drafted rookie. I mean there was active resistance. A deliberate coldness from certain players who, for whatever reason, loyalty to the old setup, discomfort with change, or just plain ego, were not prepared to embrace this kid as the future of the franchise. And when Myles Garrett saw what was happening, he didn't sit back and let it play out. He got involved, directly, personally, with exactly the kind of authority that only he carries in that building. Let me give you some context first, because I think it's important to understand who Myles Garrett is before we talk about what he did. This is a man who has survived everything Cleveland could throw at him, losing seasons that would have broken lesser competitors, coaching changes that reset the entire organizational direction, a quarterback carousel that became genuinely painful to watch year after year. He has played through all of it, showing up every single week and being dominant, regardless of whether the team around him gave him any real reason for optimism. He has had legitimate opportunities to force his way out, the kind of leverage that elite players use to escape losing situations, and he stayed. He chose Cleveland, repeatedly, not because it was comfortable, but because somewhere inside him there is a belief that this franchise can be something real, something worth fighting for. That belief is exactly why what's happening right now matters so much. Because Myles Garrett didn't step into this Shedeur Sanders situation casually. He stepped into it because he sees something in this moment that he has not seen in Cleveland for a very long time. A genuine chance to change the identity of this team. And he is not willing to let a group of resistant veterans quietly poison that chance before it even gets started. So let's talk about what the resistance actually looked like, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. From what's been described by people close to the situation, the pushback against Shedeur wasn't loud or confrontational. It was the quiet, suffocating kind that's actually harder to fight against. Subtle comments, dismissive body language during film sessions, a general atmosphere of indifference that certain veterans cultivated around the rookie. The kind of environment where a young quarterback can start to feel like an outsider in his own locker room before he's thrown a single pass in a regular season game. And then it escalated. Word got back to Garrett that some of these same veterans were going around to coaches and quietly lobbying for the quarterback competition to stay open longer than it needed to be, using the language of process and fairness to actually slow Shedeur down, to delay him, to make his path to the starting job harder than it needed to be. I want to be honest about what that is, because I think we should call it what it is. That's not competition. That's not leadership. That is a group of people prioritizing their own comfort and their own standing over the best interests of the team. And the moment Myles Garrett understood what was happening, he was done tolerating it. His response, by all accounts, was exactly what you'd expect from someone who has spent years watching Cleveland waste opportunity after opportunity. He went straight to the source. No passive-aggressive maneuvering, no locker room whisper campaign in return. Direct, confrontational, clear. The message he delivered was simple. This stops now. Shedeur Sanders deserves his shot. He has earned his shot. And if your personal discomfort with that fact is more important to you than winning football games, then you are the problem in this building. And everyone is going to know it. Now think about how that lands coming from Myles Garrett specifically. This isn't a coordinator making a speech. This isn't a front office executive sending a carefully worded memo. This is the most respected player in that locker room. A man who has earned every ounce of that respect through years of showing up and delivering, telling veterans directly that they are on the wrong side of this. That carries a weight that is almost impossible to overstate. When Myles Garrett says something in that building, it doesn't get debated. It gets processed, and people adjust accordingly. And here's what I find genuinely fascinating about Shedeur Sanders' own response to all of this, because it tells you something real about who this young man is. He hasn't gone public with any of it. He hasn't used social media to air grievances or signal to the outside world that he's dealing with internal resistance. He has been in that facility, working, preparing, doing what quarterbacks who are serious about their craft do when the noise gets loud. He's tuned it out and focused on what he can control. That kind of emotional discipline doesn't come from nowhere. You spend 2 years at Colorado under Deion Sanders, with every camera in college football pointed at your every move, with critics questioning whether your last name is the only reason you're on the field, and you either develop the ability to compartmentalize or you don't survive it. Shedeur survived it, and he came out the other side with a mental toughness that I think a lot of people in this league still haven't fully credited him for. But here's the thing. Having Myles Garrett publicly and privately in your corner is a different kind of support than just surviving on your own mental strength. Because what Garrett did wasn't just protect Shedeur from a difficult locker room environment. He changed the entire dynamic of how that locker room relates to its quarterback. When the best player on your team, the guy everyone looks to, the guy whose respect you want above all others, makes it known that he is fully behind the rookie quarterback, the conversations that were happening in the weight room and behind closed doors suddenly become very uncomfortable to continue. You cannot lobby against a player that Myles Garrett has publicly endorsed. You cannot maintain a posture of cold dismissal towards someone that the franchise cornerstone has chosen to go to bat for. The math on that is very simple, and every veteran in that locker room understands it. Let me also take a moment to think about this from a football perspective, because beyond the cultural and interpersonal dimensions of this story, there is a genuinely strategic argument for why Garrett is right to fight for Sanders the way he is. Think about what Shedeur actually showed last season in those 7 starts. Over 1,400 yards passing, 7 touchdowns, on a 5-win team, behind a porous offensive line, without the kind of receiving weapons that make a young quarterback's job manageable. The 10 interceptions were real, and I've never tried to pretend otherwise, but the context around those numbers matters enormously. He was a 5th-round pick, the league's way of telling you someone isn't worth betting on, and he played well enough to earn a Pro Bowl selection. The first Browns quarterback to do that since Derek Anderson nearly 2 decades ago. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because there is something real there. Myles Garrett sees it. He sees the pocket presence. He sees the arm talent. He sees the competitive fire that doesn't flinch under pressure. And as someone who has spent his entire career watching quarterbacks come through Cleveland and either get broken by the environment or fail to clear the basic competency bar, I think Garrett recognizes that this is different, that this is a player worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth drawing a line in the sand over. Now let's talk about what this means for the Browns front office, because Garrett's involvement doesn't just reshape the locker room, it puts real pressure on the people making roster and depth chart decisions. When your most important player, a guy who commands generational respect in that building, aligns himself this clearly with your rookie quarterback, you cannot simply ignore that signal and pretend it isn't affecting the organizational calculus. The front office was already moving in the direction of Sanders based on everything the coaching staff has been signaling through OTA rep distribution. But Garrett's posture adds a layer to this that goes beyond coaching decisions. It's a statement about organizational identity. It's a veteran leader saying, loudly, through his actions, that the culture of excuse-making and comfortable mediocrity that has defined Cleveland for too long is no longer acceptable. And I think there's something genuinely powerful in the symbolism of that. Think about what it means for a young quarterback to walk into a facility knowing that the most dominant defensive player in the game has his back, not in a performative way, not in a PR-friendly we're all teammates way, in a real, I will confront the people working against you way. That kind of support does something to a quarterback's confidence that no coaching session or film study can replicate. It tells him that the people who matter in this building believe in him. That when things get hard, and they will get hard because they always do for young quarterbacks, he is not navigating it alone. There will be people who say Garrett should stay in his lane, that the defensive side of the ball doesn't have standing to weigh in on quarterback decisions. And I get it. On paper, that's a reasonable organizational principle. Position groups mind their business. Coaches make the calls. Everyone stays in their designated lane. But that's not how real leadership functions in real locker rooms. Real leadership, the kind that actually changes culture, that actually moves organizations from losing to winning, doesn't wait for formal permission. It acts when it sees something wrong. It speaks when the people with official authority are moving too slowly or sending mixed signals. Myles Garrett looked at what was happening to Shedeur Sanders and made a judgment call that waiting was not an option. I don't think you can look at his track record in Cleveland and argue he made the wrong call. The veterans who were working against Sanders are now in an incredibly uncomfortable position. They have been called out, not publicly, not in a way that creates external headlines, but internally, in the place that matters most. They know where Myles stands. They know where this is going. And the decision they face now is whether to get on board with the direction this team is clearly heading, or to continue a resistance that now has the full weight of Myles Garrett pushing against it. That is not a comfortable place to be. For most of them, I'd expect the calculation to be pretty straightforward. Here is where I think this all lands. Shedeur Sanders is going to be named the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, not as the conclusion of some prolonged manufactured competition designed to generate off-season content, not after weeks of coaching staff non-answers that leave everyone guessing. He is going to get that job because he performed well enough last season to deserve it, because every credible voice around this team has been pointing in that direction for months, and because the most important player on the roster has now made it personal. When Myles Garrett invests his credibility in something inside that building, that thing tends to happen. That's just what his presence does to the organizational culture. And when the moment finally comes, when Shedeur Sanders jogs out onto that field for the first regular season snap as the undisputed QB1 of the Cleveland Browns, I want you to think back to everything that had to happen behind those closed doors to get there. The resistance that had to be overcome, the veteran pushback that had to be confronted, the internal lobbying that had to be shut down, the leadership that had to step in and refuse to let this opportunity be wasted. None of that will be visible in the highlight reel. None of it will show up in the box score. But it will have been the foundation of everything that follows. Cleveland has spent a very long time searching for the right quarterback and the right moment to build something meaningful around. Right now, they appear to have both. And the most important player in that organization is making absolutely certain that nobody inside those walls is allowed to get in the way of it.